esteemed kind of colleagues on the stage. We have Wan Sie Lee, who's the head of safety in IMDA. We have Adam Beaumont, who's director of the UK AI Security Institute. And we have Austin Mayron, who's director of the US Center for AI Standards and Innovation. And then we have Sara Hooker, who's co-founder of an amazing new AI startup called Adaption Labs. So we're very fortunate to have them each. I'm going to ask in turn for them to say a little bit about kind of what the current state of play is with their own work and their own organization. So Adam, I may start with you.
Thank you, Chris, for those remarks. Really appreciate that. Thank you for facilitating the panel. And thank you to India for hosting this summit. So as you said, I am director of the AI Security Institute in the UK. We were founded at the Bletchley Park AI Summit back in 2024. And I want to say a little bit about the network, and I'll say a little bit about AISI. So firstly, just to call out, we have other network members in the room as well as the panel. So you might just wave in the front row, some of the, maybe a little ripple. So the network is comprised of 10 expert organizations that are evaluating AI. We're now known as the Network for Advanced AI Measurement, Evaluation, and Science, or NAMES, that brings together those who've invested quite heavily in their AI safety and security institutes or capabilities and who are doing technical work, and we exchange that and work, how do we share that with the rest of the world? I'm really delighted that we're able to be here and participate in this panel, but also to contribute to some of the key deliverables from the summit, like the Commons, where UK AISI, we are making available our Inspect platform, our framework for doing evaluations that is available via open source and used by many other organizations, both in the frontier AI companies, but also in institutions in government that we're really, really proud of, think really helps move us forward. A couple of opening remarks, I guess, on the importance of measurement, the theme of our talk today, where being able to measure AI models and capabilities is vital to our ability to be able to understand them. Without the right tools, we can't see what the models are capable of, and we won't be able to make the best use of them. And so AISI's mission is focused on building that scientific understanding for governments, with an S, not just the UK, but we really care about this international work too. And we're doing this alongside a new investment in the National Physical Laboratory, which is a Center for AI Measurement, aimed at accelerating the development and deployment of secure and transparent AI and the kind of adoption field. I might pause there just to pass over, and then maybe we'll come back to some questions. Thank you.
Wan Sie, do you want to go?
Hi everyone, I'm Wan Sie from Singapore. So I lead the work on AI governance and safety in the Infocom Media Development Authority, and as well as the Singapore AISI in terms of the policy and international engagements. Just a quick introduction about the Singapore AISI. It stands for AI Safety Institute. It was set up also in 2024-ish, together when we were all talking about AISIs at that time. I think around the Seoul summit, so you have Bletchley, and then there was Seoul, and then at the Seoul summit we announced that we have an AISI as well. And then shortly after, that's when the network was sort of put together. What the Singapore AISI does is also very much focused on evaluation, both conducting evaluations as well as research into the science of evaluations, right? Evaluation of models. We think that it's going to be very important to invest some of these resources in this space, because evals is still a very much emerging science. We're constantly finding new things that we need to tackle, and having an ability, a technical ability within the government, as well as together with research institutions in Singapore to do that is important for us. So a lot of our AISI work is also cited out of the Nanyang Technological University as part of the Digital Trust Center. So we find it's important to be able to tap on capabilities from research to deliver the promise that what the AISI is meant to achieve. So I'm just going to pause here so that we can get into a bit more of the details later. Just a quick introduction of AISIs. Yeah, and as Adam said, we have fellow AISIs here. I just want to just call them out so they are not looking at their phones. Japan, Australia, and Korea. Thank you.
We're thrilled to have everybody here from many of the other ACs as well. I think moving kind of along, Austin, it would be great to hear from you a bit about the US CAISI and all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I want to thank you, Chris, my fellow panelists, the other ACs and the UK and its coordinator role for the network, and our host in India for having us here today. My name is Austin Mayron, and I serve as acting director of the U.S. Center for AI Standards and Innovation. As folks know or may know, in June of last year, Secretary Howard Lutnick of the Department of Commerce rebranded our organization from the U.S. AI Safety Institute to the Center for AI Standards and Innovation. This wasn't just a name change, it was a total change in our mission. We've moved from a focus on AI safety, and we're now focused on innovation and fostering adoption of AI. CAISI is housed within the National Institute for Standards and Technology, which has a long history of working with industry to develop the underlying measurement science tests and standards to unlock the adoption of new technologies. Following this tradition, CAISI works to develop the science of AI needed to understand AI systems. One story that I really like is that during the physicist Albert Einstein's lifetime, a book was published, 100 authors against Albert Einstein. And when Einstein was asked how he'd respond to the authors of that book, he said, well, if I were wrong, you would have only needed one. And that story is very powerful to me because I see that as part of CAISI's mission. Our job isn't to be 100 voices telling people they're wrong or they can't do this or they can't do that. Our job is to be the one voice and to work with our fellow members in the network so that they can be the one voice in their country that delivers the correct answer, because that's the thing when it comes to things that are scientific or technical is there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and these things can be measured, and we need to figure out how to do it. So the work that we're doing is especially important to policymakers as we focus on AI adoption. At CAISI, we conduct our own evaluations of US models and of foreign models to understand their capabilities, their vulnerabilities, and the state of global competition. Just recently, we published draft guidelines in the form of a NIST publication on best practices for AI automated evaluations. However, we cannot and should not do this work alone. Aligning with like-minded countries through the network is critically important to ensure that we don't end up with a fragmented ecosystem. And just one way to think about that is if 10 countries evaluate a model and they view it as having a certain capability, and then one country evaluates it and comes to another conclusion, well, how do we have a conversation about, did we do the same evaluation? Are we measuring the same thing? Are we taking into account the same considerations and questioning the same assumptions? So we think that's incredibly important for innovation. We think it's important for adoption. We're doing this work internally, and we're doing it through the network, and we're excited to be here today.
Thanks so much, Austin. In addition to having many of the network members here today, we're also fortunate to have some industry as well. And so, Sara, I'd love to hear a bit about you and what you all are doing.
Okay, excellent. Yes, I'm the only rogue non-AC person on this panel, so I feel very honored to be included. So I suspect I'm here to bring maybe more of a industry or computer scientist perspective. So over the last 10 years, I've been part of several frontier AI labs. I was at DeepMind, and then I led a research arm at Cohere, and now I'm working on Adaption. But I'm a computer scientist, so maybe I'll share I guess two perspectives to get us started. One is around benchmarks in general and evaluations. The other is around the role of government in those. For benchmarks, I think we're at what I would call the muddy middle. So there's a lot of benchmarks that are not that useful anymore, mainly because they're quite static. They are very academic in nature. They capture snapshots in time that are quickly either overfit to if they're open source. So typically a lot of frontier models train on these benchmarks, and so they become worthless. They're not worth the effort of curating, or they don't capture the frontier and how it's moving. And so I think that's worth having a conversation about. How do we return to private test sets? How do we really maintain like true calibrated estimates of performance? This relates to the second category. So there's both what industry can do and also academia, but frankly, I think there's two things that are interesting about the role of government. One is thing that does make me optimistic is that this is the first wave. We talked about, I mean, you were talking about Bletchley and being a few years ago. That for me was very encouraging because a lot of it was about attracting technical, talented people to government. And this has typically been quite challenging. And I think that one of the things that I'm most optimistic about is that AISIs have been able to attract talent, and that's important for a few reasons. Government has to have the ability to shape a growing ecosystem of technology. My career has been odd because the thing I chose to study exploded and transcended research conferences into the real world. And the ramifications of that are important to think about. And there has to be a role of government. The other thing I'll put out before we open up is that I do think government has this really unique position to curate private test sets, to have more calibrated estimates of model performance, to insist what languages are covered by a model, which are rarely reported in full detail, but also to talk about much more specific evolving risks that typically governments have a better view of, like cybersecurity, which I think is actually very credible. And I think there's few people positioned to tackle it. So I think that's also fun to think about here because we typically, I think you were hinting at it, but there might be some pessimism, but I also think there's different roles for benchmarking and we should be talking about why it's important to bring technical talent into government.
It's a great point, and I think there's been a lot of progress in kind of drawing in talent into government. There's been a lot of progress on evaluations, as I was mentioning earlier. It's partly why this kind of panel is so important. And but I think it would be worth turning now, I think, to talking a little bit about just what are some of the challenges we're now seeing when it comes to evaluation. We've got, I think it feels like after 2 years we've got a bit of talent in the system. We have some infrastructure in place to start kind of building on, what are the challenges in the AI evaluation space that you all are kind of wrestling with? And in particular, how can the network help? Like what role can the network play in facilitating the ability to overcome some of those challenges? Wan Sie, I may start with you and then we can kind of work through.
Sure. I think all of us can agree that as AI capabilities develop very quickly, I think one of the big challenges is how do we catch up in terms of evaluating them and assessing them for reliability, robustness, security, safety, and so on. And that's one big challenge, and that's why the network is helpful, because I think we can draw on one another's strengths and capabilities. We all look at slightly different things, and some of it's the same, and those are some areas where we could work together. But I think having the network members come together to share methodologies, experience of how they're tackling some of these issues is important. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. We talk about in India here especially, a very important aspect is how do you ensure that models address languages and culture, for example. So making sure that you do not then expose critical concerns when the models cannot cater for different types of languages. And I think the network has been a wonderful team and resource for us to tap on, because we have different members who can then bring, there are different types of languages to participate in testing exercise together. So we've done joint testing. The reason why I can call out my fellow AISIs is because we've done a lot of work together and we're kind of friends and we know each other well. And I forgot to mention, actually, Kenya is also in the room. Hi, Stephanie. Yeah. So that's one value that the network brings. The other value is also then, besides the language element, is also where we focus on slightly different things, right? As I mentioned. And we're interested in some of the harms that citizens deal with on a day-to-day basis, like data disclosure. We're looking at what does agentic deployment look like and how does that impact citizens. And whereas, in the UK, for example, you look at some of the frontier issues around, uplifting of cyber capabilities, CBRN and so on. So I think that allows us to look at different things and then bring our own sort of value together. Yeah.
Adam, do you want to?
Yeah, I might expand on that a bit. So in the UK, firstly, to your talent point, we've now got about 250 people in the UK AISI, of which 100 are our technical staff. And you're right, Wan Sie, we've been very focused on frontier AI systems and evaluated about 30 different frontier AI systems for a variety of different risks, ranging from cybersecurity or chem bio risks or impact on society. Some of the challenges in that space and why the network is very helpful is because we need more people to work on these issues, right? And it's one of the things I really loved about the summit so far is just seeing how many people are interested in working in AI, and particularly the participation of so many students in the conference that makes me very optimistic for the future, because we've got a lot of work to do. I think on evaluations, the things that I am concerned about at the moment are how do we start to evaluate agents really effectively? So when I think about our cyber evaluations, where we started with kind of capture the flag type approaches, we're increasingly using cyber ranges. But when we move towards having AI systems working together on these problems, I think our approach will need to change. And I'm in the market for ideas and learning from other network members, because I think this will be quite difficult. And then I guess the last challenge with evaluation, I really wanted to agree with Sarah's point around there are things only governments can do because we hold either the data or the powers to be able to do something about different risks. So there is a question around what do we publish, what should we share? And so much of AISI's work in the UK is public, and we blog about it, post papers, share that. And we've tried to take that approach when we've been coordinating the network with a blog post on some of our challenges that we've shared. But equally, some of our work needs to be private and is either shared with companies privately or is shared with governments privately.
It's a great point. I think there's a lot of work to do as well about setting norms about what should be public and what should be private, just given some of the information hazards and attention hazards of some of this. You mentioned agents earlier. I know, Austin, there's been some great work happening within the US CAISI on agentic security as well. We'd love to draw you in on evaluations more broadly too.
Absolutely. And I'll touch on both. So the first, in terms of the challenges, I mean, the main challenge is that this field is so new and it's evolving so quickly. There are new capabilities and new things to test and measure every day. And it's keeping all of our organizations focused on the thing we're trying to measure and not the new capability that's exciting that we also want to measure, is I think, a task, given how rapidly the technology is evolving. In terms of what we do through the network and what we're doing at CAISI, we're trying to build a shared vernacular, a shared set of practices that we can use to communicate the work that we do in terms of evaluations. There's 3 areas in particular we've noticed that there's a need for us to build best practices and try to develop consensus. The first is about figuring out exactly what we're measuring and what the import of that is. I think folks, there's a lot of things that AI can and will do, but how do you measure that with a benchmark? And is a benchmark the appropriate tool to evaluate that concept? In the field, there's a concept called chart crime, which is when you give a graph and the graph doesn't actually depict what the graph may depict at first blush. For instance, the y-axis isn't scaled, or other features. I remember one early presentation of my team, they gave me a chart and the y-axis was model performance and one model was higher than the other. And it's like, well, what is model performance? And they actually then had to walk me through exactly what they contended went into that and the methodology. But that methodology and everything that goes behind it, that's incredibly important, because when we talk about a lot of these commercially available benchmarks, they'll measure performance on graduate level or undergraduate level science questions. Well, just because a model can perform well on a biology 101 exam doesn't mean that it can actually help a researcher develop a novel vaccine, which could be something that somebody would want a model to do. And understanding those capabilities, particularly as now we're getting to the agentic world, is increasingly important. The other 2, which are areas that the network worked on, including at our meeting in San Diego, are reporting out results of evaluations. How do you do that? If you run a benchmark 10 times, do you tell people that you did it 10 times? Do you pick the best run? Do you take an average? What information do you have to disclose so that another person can reproduce that work? In the US, the president issued an executive order on gold standard science, that we want science that is reproducible, that's transparent, where people explain the assumptions they're making, the configurations they're setting. And I think we've really taken that to heart. We want to communicate that information to the rest of the ecosystem, to our fellow network members, and to the people who review our products, so they understand. And the process of going through and identifying what should be reported out, I think, has been incredibly useful, at least for us at CAISI. If you look, we have the publication, Best Practices for Automated Benchmark Evaluations. It's NIST AI 802. We'd love if you read it, give us your comments and thoughts. So I'll put that plug in. But in that document, we identify some practices that we call emerging practices. So these are practices that we haven't seen necessarily take hold across the evaluator ecosystem, but we think they would be helpful. And one of those practices that stands out to me is publishing transcripts, so that other evaluators and other members of the network can see exactly what happened with, for instance, the benchmark that you ran. And we flagged it as an emerging practice because we ourselves don't do that yet. And so we're hoping through identifying it as emerging practice and hopefully doing it ourselves, we can help shake the ecosystem. So yeah, that's
great. It's great. And I want to come back to kind of where the network is at and some of the things that came out of San Diego. But before getting to that, Sara, how are you thinking about and conceptualizing evaluations at the moment, just what some of the lay of the land is when it comes to the challenges involved?
Yeah, and I'll just say that was quite fun because you said the NIST report, and actually a lady was nodding energetically in the audience, which is a very great reaction to a full NIST report of different landscapes. So, I mean, I'll throw out three things which I think are very interesting here, which are the core challenges, I think, of where we are with benchmarks. One is that what I would call the influx of capital into this field. And so let me just be candid. When I started working on machine learning, all the benchmarks were open because no one cared about what we did, and everyone thought we were slightly foolish for working on what we did. And so it was a smaller community. In the last 10 years, we've had massive influx of capital, and that is the conflation with marketing. So when there's a huge amount at stake, people care about benchmarks in a way that is often it's not about measuring progress. It's about stating you've arrived somewhere. And what this means is it creates a conundrum. We can't use open benchmarks anymore because they're immediately gamified and trained on. Private benchmarks, you would think, don't have these issues, but we did a very thorough, I'm quite proud of this work. We did something called the leaderboard illusion, where the most widely used benchmark has been widely gamed. I mean, I think you alluded to this for like number of goes you get, or actually, I think you were talking about number of goes you get to submit a model to something. If someone can submit 34 models and choose the best score, it's a bit cheeky, like, oh, what are we doing here? So that's the first thing, is that we're in a conundrum where the difficulty of benchmarking is partly because there's huge pressure on all the stakeholders involved. And this has to be acknowledged because it means we have to go back to private test sets. That's important. It means we have to not give notice of when things are being benchmarked. That's important if it's to be credible. And it also means that if you're in the open community, you need to have holdouts, or you need to have some way of like evolving your benchmark. And that's fun because then you can catch people overfit to it, right? If you kept some data back and then you can do a cheeky like report a year later, I think that's quite fun to think about. Number two is very powerful, which is that our benchmarks are not capturing real world harm in a meaningful way. And this is quite sincere. I think we sometimes organize safety gatherings and it's all about the most clever way you can break a model. But the truth is, like, a lot of the harms today are about, phone calls which are fraudulent, which are scaled because of voice AI is getting so good. It's about the ability to, frankly, create fake resumes very readily. So it's interesting, like, we're hiring aggressively for a team. I'm seeing this firsthand, but it's also about just the subtle ways in which people may be often, like, I think this is not talked about in these circles, but it's AI companionship and the vulnerability of that. And I think it's very interesting because that, I'm talking about now computer science focus or academic focus, that is often not treated to the same degree. It's not seen as like something that we should dedicate a lot of resources to or treat in competence. And that has to change because now that our technology that we build is being used everywhere, we have to think about the system and the implications. So that's the second component, is that our benchmarks have to take into account not just the algorithm, but the system and the interaction. And then the third thing I'll say is this, and this is maybe a cheeky thing. I use my first comment to say why I think it's so important that AISIs exist and they have this purview. So the whole point of benchmarking is to guide decisions. And if you benchmark and you don't make a decision afterwards, you're just collecting data. And the truth is, I think that's the major challenge ahead, is how, I think if we look back and the years have passed, how has the benchmarks informed decision-making? And I think that's the ultimate test of whether AISIs have permanence in government, is whether they can influence the shape of the ecosystem. And I think that's worth talking about, because that is a core challenge for how benchmarks are crafted. Otherwise, you're just collecting reports and they're sitting there.
I think that's a great point, and certainly one that I think I'd actually like to build on in the next question. I'll also say we're going to try and open up the conversation in a bit. This will be kind of the last round. I'm going to definitely draw in some of the other members of the AISI network as well in a minute. But before we get to that, I want to kind of talk over, within the San Diego conference that happened a little over a month ago now, there was a lot of great discussion, as I mentioned earlier, about evaluations. We've talked a little bit about challenges so far, but it'd be great to hear a little bit about, what kind of alignment there was across members of the international network when it came to, practices for evaluations, what some of the conclusions were. And the reason I appreciated Sarah's framing as well is, for there to be alignment on some of the evals, there would probably presumably also need to be some alignment on like what these evals are for, and like what are the decisions that we're trying to move towards. So to the extent that you can speak to those questions, it'd be great to kind of draw out a little bit, how those conversations went and where the different members within the network are thinking of pushing these conversations. Adam, given the kind of great role that the UK is now playing in that, I'll kind of turn to you to lead this round of questions.
Sure, thank you. And just to give a bit of context on what happened in San Diego. So this was in San Diego, you had the NeurIPS conference with many different AI researchers all gathering in one place in the US. And we held a network event in the margins of that to be able to bring together both the network members, but also industry practitioners and experts to have a workshop to explore these questions and look at, well, what are the best practices that we're noticing in evaluations? What open questions do we still have? At UK AISI, we published a blog post about this last week that summarizes some of the different things that we noticed where there was common agreement. They're around things like having a clear objective and purpose for an evaluation. To your point earlier, Austin, like what is it that we are actually measuring, and have we scoped that question accurately to get an answer from the evaluation? Being able to reproduce results, so these can be like verified by other members in their context, so having the right amount of transparency. But we also had a range of like open questions. One thing we explored was what format should reports take? Do we want to kind of standardize around a common approach to that? What kind of principles we have about when to be public or private? So these are some of the kind of the areas of common agreement, but also open questions that we had. And then on actions taken, because I didn't want to leave Sarah's point hanging around. So what decisions do these kind of drive? I guess in the UK, I can see this perhaps most clearly in the realm of cybersecurity, and how our understanding of frontier AI capability in AISI, combined with places like our National Cybersecurity Center, when you bring those two things together, then that can turn into decisions that are things like the European AISI standard for secure AI deployment that enables people to build things in a more secure way, or it factors into the advice, guidance, and products in cybersecurity because we have a better understanding of frontier AI risks and how that manifests. That's one example, but I think it cuts across many different domains.
Austin, does that kind of match your reflections on some of the conversations that have been taking place?
Yeah, absolutely. And echoing Adam, I think in the meeting we had in San Diego, we had a terrific amount of alignment around sort of the core principles of what we're doing. And they track the gold standard science principles I was discussing earlier. We want evaluation science that's transparent, that's that's reproducible, that's reliable. It is an immense scientific and technical task for us to actually measure the capabilities of these models. It's not quite the same as measuring, how long is a meter or how heavy is a kilogram. These measurements, it's a lot more involved. There's a lot more subtle decisions and assumptions that you have to make when you do these evaluations. And I think all of our networks, all the AISIs, were very interested in those aspects of the science and also communicating clearly. I think each member of the network, they may have policymakers in their home country that want to take policy in a certain direction, but I think we're developing sort of the core of measurement science and the language we can use to communicate with one another about AI evaluations and assessments. And at least from my vantage point at CAISI, I think just doing that work in and of itself has been a terrific value add for the US government. We have a small team of experts that's very skilled at what they do in terms of understanding models, how they perform. And we've been able to leverage that and engage with partners across the US government to inform a wide variety of decisions. We've talked to various organizations about adoption and procurement. Which model do you buy? That's a massively important decision for the US government. It's an important decision for governments across the world. And that may be informed by things like model performance. And to bring it all full circle to talk about some of the work we're doing as AISIs and CAISI is, for instance, benchmarks. If somebody says I scored a certain amount on a benchmark, well, how many tokens did you use? What was the budget? What's the cost efficiency of it? That matters a lot for people who are adopting, deploying AI. And so is that something that should be reported alongside your benchmark result? Did you get a better score because you used significantly more resources to get there? Doesn't mean you didn't get the higher score, but it could inform a lot of decisions. And so sometimes we're starting sort of in a first principles state where we say, what even should we be measuring? Should we just be measuring the benchmark? Are there other things that may be relevant to folks as policymakers as they make their determinations? And so as members of the network, we've been able to really communicate about what should be measured, what should be reported, and how do we do it.
Great. Wan Sie, would you like to add some color? And before you start, if anyone who's also part of the network would like to speak or come in, please raise your hand as well, and we'll get a microphone to you. But Wan Sie.
Yeah, I'm just going to be a little bit cheeky here. One, I agree. We agreed in San Diego that it's important that we focus on the science and developing the methodology for evals. I think that's super important. And focusing on how to do this well, right? And I think, and really also to address Sarah's point earlier that for AISIs to be relevant and to be useful, we do have to meet a certain need within our governments, right? And all of us have, I think, slightly different needs within our governments. From Singapore's point of view, it is about, yes, evaluations of models for policymakers in Singapore. At the same time, it's also building methodologies that we can then translate into useful best practices and tools that the rest of the community, the rest of the industry learn from. I think that's also another mission that we have that for us, it's very important. But every AISI has a slightly different need. And I think that's really also answering Chris' question. Do we agree on what we want to measure together? No, I don't think that's what we are trying to do in the network. It's what we agree on is we should be building out the science of evals and the methods. And that's something that we can come together collectively to do well. And so then where I think is the benefit of the network coming together is not just in terms of, developing methodologies, building out the science and so on, but it's also something that I've said quite a lot of, is that element of creating this network of trust. I think evals will change, needs will change, objectives will change. But having a group of institutions that you could work together on, because you've done work together over, for now, I think 2 years already. We've done joint testing exercises together. Go to the Singapore AISI website. You can read some of the joint testing reports that we've published. What are some of the methodologies? What are some of the outcomes of that? I think that give you a sense of the kind of work that we did together. But having a group of institutions that you could, because you have built a relationship with, because you talk to every other, now maybe less often, but at one point every week, right? I think it's very useful when you do need to start to think about when you have to do more together, when you have to pick up the phone and say, this thing has happened, can I get a sense of what's going on your end? I think that trust is really important. And this is one of those networks, well, I think it's the only network where we have a technical conversation with one another at a government level that allows us to exchange information in a trusted manner. And I think that's really the value of the network that doesn't get spoken enough of. Yep.
I really like that kind of framing of the network in terms of the trust of the information exchange, and in particular, the kind of emphasis on the technical and scientific nature of that exchange, less about what the specific risk is that being studied, but more how we should actually do these evaluations, how we can standardize some of them, et cetera. We want this to be a kind of participatory conversation. We can hopefully kind of open this up to the floor a little bit for some questions. There's also, if anyone in the AISI network would like to comment, or the international network rather, would like to kind of offer additional comments or questions as well, please feel free to raise your hand. I may open the floor to, I think what I may do is take 2 or 3 questions at once, and then we'll kind of turn to the panelists to be able to speak. So yes, I'll start with you.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the conversation, really helpful. Just want to understand, as you're moving from, say, static models to more agentic deployments, where behavior... Yeah, so I'll just repeat my question. I just want to understand, as we're moving from static models to agentic deployments, where behavior is more emerging from the interaction with the model, the tools, the memory, how exactly is evaluation evolving to better measure that?
Okay, great, thanks. If we can have a couple of other questions as well. I see a hand right there in the middle of the row, and then another hand.
Hi, thank you for your insights. And I just wanted to ask that with the growth of AI in the modern era, many countries and many private institutions, they are making new models. But every country's resources, they are on a different scale, and their budgets for AC is different. So how does the network help these countries and to keep par with the evaluations and everything? And in terms of resources, is AC helping other countries apart from the network, I would say? Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then we'll take one more. If you can pass it right across the row there, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just wanted to understand, how does geopolitics affect your work? The evaluation metrics. You are a bunch of experts, but there is geopolitics around AI. How does that affect your work?
Great. So we've got kind of 3 starter questions. They kind of cover a range of issues from how evals are evolving to resources and budget constraints, and kind of taking into account the fact that there's kind of differential opportunities across some of the different ACs, and then obviously just some of the broader context, which I would just kind of immediately frame as part of the value of some of these scientific and technical exchanges, or to try and keep it focused on the core science. But does any of you, whenever you like to kind of take the lead in offering response? Yeah, Adam.
I might just answer the resourcing point, because I'm conscious UKAC went first, and we are the largest concentration of talent in government that's looking at this kind of issue. Our approach is to publish and to share is essentially our goal. So things like both sharing software, like the Inspect framework to do evaluations, but also Control Arena, Inspect Cyber. We've a bunch of these different tools we've been trying to publish in open source and share, and getting good take up around the world and in different companies and governments, but also to share what we are learning. So in December, we published the Frontier AI Trends report that kind of summarizes 2 years worth of evaluations across 30 different models that we think is helpful to share with others to then inform policy making, inform decisions. So it's not the case that this is sort of like a closed club, the only place where learning happens. And I think the approach of sharing information, technology, tools, methodologies is a way that many people can learn and scale.
Wan Sie, did you want to?
I can take the agentic one. Yeah, and then Austin, you can do the geopolitics one. Anyway, jokes aside. Okay. The agentic one. It's a great question, actually. Yes, it is a new area of evals. We are all figuring out how to do it. We've tried it within the network. Actually, we did a joint testing exercise last year on just a very initial kind of thinking about how would you test for agents. And we realized that some of the key differences, number one, the scaffolding is very different because you're not just looking at the output, you're also looking at what happens in between. You have to find ways in which to collect the data of what tools are being called, are the right tools being called, undesirable requests being turned down, and so on. So there's quite a lot of things that have to be done in terms of scaffold. And as well as we were quite ambitious and we tried to do a multilingual agentic evaluation in that joint testing exercise. And we realized that actually that it's very complicated when you think about, using different languages. When you're translating the data sets that are used to call the agents, actually you have to also worry about things like tool calling. What kind of languages should the tool in? Do I in Japanese actually the data set we still use the English names, but in another language you have to translate the tool call into a different language, and so on. So a lot of areas and opportunities actually for us to develop out agentic testing. And I think that's where, again, coming back, I sound like the broken record, but coming back to this network in terms of how we could help each other to build this out, it's important. But also, I think to the earlier question about engaging with the broader community, I think we're also keen to learn from everybody else who's doing this work. That's why we have people like Sara, third-party testers, working with the labs and so on to really see how we could augment one another's efforts. And over to you, Austin.
Well, I'm just going to echo that. I think the network is an incredibly important forum for science and technical exchange. I think when governments interact, sometimes you have the subject matter experts who are close to the ground, and then it gets filtered up through layers of bureaucrats and diplomats before it gets communicated to other countries. And what the network does incredibly well is we put our experts together and they talk as experts do. Sometimes they talk on Slack, sometimes they talk on email. I don't use Slack. I'm not an engineer, but I understand people in the computer science field. They grew up on Slack. They use it all the time. And I really do enjoy the fact that my staff tell me that I was just talking to so-and-so from another AISI on Slack, because the field is moving so quickly. We want our experts exchanging ideas and talking and sharing papers and saying, we saw this new problem, we saw this new paper. How should this change the way we're doing our work? And so the network is an incredible forum for that type of exchange. And I think we want to keep it that way. And then we also are trying to be as transparent as we can. We love to come to events like this and talk about the work that we're doing. We published a quite detailed blog post in the follow-up from San Diego. And our work in San Diego led to 802, the publication I spoke about earlier, which really goes in depth about some of the things we're looking at in terms of automated benchmark evaluations. So I think all of our organizations, we're trying to put our information out there. This common language we're trying to build around AI evaluations and assessments, it doesn't work unless we share it. And so we have a very open, collaborative environment, and our materials are out there, and we really encourage you to engage. I think each of our nations engages in different ways, but US CAISI, we have requests for comment, requests for information out to industry. When we do publications, we publish drafts for comment, and we solicit comments from anybody in the ecosystem who has something to add. And so we want to keep that going.
Okay, I think we've got time for 2 more questions, and then we'll kind of have a rapid fire closeout. There's one gentleman over here, and then another gentleman right there.
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you so much. Probably from the perspective that you are making AI safer day by day. I have a technical question around this. So most of the frontier models, they develop capabilities, and after that, we have evals catching up to make it safer. Now, the challenge here is that if you see from an architectural perspective, superposition, polysymmetry are inherent in the architecture of these models. How are we probably innovating to essentially rectify that so that the frontier models don't develop these capabilities? And I had one add-on to the geopolitical
very
thing.
quickly, and then we need to go to the last question after you.
I had one point on the geopolitical thing, was that specific to US, So very recently, there has been executive order from the perspective of American leadership in AI. Would that have impact on AI safety? And if you can just elaborate and help us understand that.
All right. Last question here, and then we'll go to the audience or go to the panelists.
My question is regarding control and the lack of development of measurements and benchmarks on particularly intervenability and processes and procedures to roll back to last known good. So I'm wondering, perhaps, if Sara, if you know, privately you have that, but it certainly doesn't exist at the AI safety level.
I may. So there's a lot put on the table in terms of just some of the next generation, I think, topics within evals. I might reframe it in that regard. Like, is there kind of, we've only got a couple minutes left here, so just some brief thoughts about where the eval space should go in the future, and then we can kind of close out the discussion. And start with you,
Maybe
Sara.
I'll throw out two things because there were two. I mean, one thought is this idea that evaluations happen after models. I think that's mainly a facet of access to evaluations. So typically frontier labs continuously evaluate across different life cycle stages. So training is incredibly expensive. A lot of your capital is in it. So you are almost certainly measuring many attributes over the course of pre-training, post-training, and then test time scaling. So I think that's mainly a facet of when third-party auditors get access, and that's worth a conversation. I think few third-party auditors do have access before. It's often just before release, frankly. So there's a question as well, like, does that have enough intervention point if something is wrong? There's also an implicit question of, you know, many frontier labs set projections or thresholds for different degrees of risk. And there's a question of how is that the bending of those depending on how progress has actually come about. So I think that gets to one of the first questions. The second one about rolling back, I think that the notion of rolling back, I'm not quite sure I understood. So typically most frontier labs have multiple models at any one time, and multiple generations. And actually for many reasons, including cost, you may not be getting the model you actually think you're using, just to put it out there. And so rolling back, typically it's a pool of models. And so the idea of a monolithic model is not quite true anymore. And then the idea of rolling back maybe is not as clear because you can roll back in training time. So typically you checkpoint aggressively, but yeah, go ahead. Oh, yes, go. Let me open up. Yes. Good poke, Chris. Yes. What do others think? Go for it. Yes.
Just any kind of quick rapid fire.
Chris has been an
reflection.
excellent moderator. Well done.
We've got about 1 minute left. I just wanted to offer kind of a quick 20 or 30-second intervention for the rest of the panelists about the future of evals and where they'd like to see things go.
I'll just say quickly in response to one of the questions, we at CAISI, we do have agreements with many of the frontier labs and are working to get agreements with the others to enable us to do pre-deployment evaluations. And I think that's an incredible tool that CAISI has in terms of understanding the models. And it's something we look forward to continue to do with our industry partners.
Yeah, the same is true in the UK. And there's good news and bad news here. I think in our Frontier AI Trends report, we noted like safeguards are improving, but we still are able to get universal jailbreaks for many of the risks that we're concerned about. And that picture will look different between sort of responsible deployers that are implementing safeguards in proprietary models. Is a different kettle of fish for open weight models that present different risks.
Maybe very quickly, I think next step, we're going to focus very much on agentic AI evals. I think that's an area that needs a lot of work on, one. Two, I think something that we've never talked about, and I don't think maybe we will do it as part of the network, but certainly something that's important is societal impact assessment. I think that's something that we need to spend a lot more time on. It's not your technical eval, it's not benchmarking, it's not red teaming or anything like that, but it's societal impact evals that I think, or assessments that I think will inform on some of the policies that we want to make. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for a very rich discussion. Please follow me in congratulating just all the great panelists and the work that's happening in the International Network for Advanced AI Measurement, Evaluation, and Science. So thank you so much, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Well done.